This is a production of South Dakota Public Broadcasting.
Support for Images of the Past is provided by SDN Communications and the Friends of SDPB.
Old photographs have a way of accumulating. People keep them because they have meaning from the time they are taken until many years later. Family photos can bridge the time between generations. Every picture is an historical record, but some are more important than others. Some reveal something special, and some people go to great lengths to acquire, preserve, and share these special pictures. These are the collectors. 4 South Dakota collectors have done extraordinary things with their accumulated images. Paul Horsted is a professional photographer and has been for a long time. He's shot news and sports and also worked for the South Dakota Department of Tourism for a time. But he's probably best known for a series of books featuring yesterday and today photographs and the stories behind them.
So we're standing here at the site of one of the first photographs ever taken in the Black Hills. During the 1874 Black Hills expedition, a photographer named William Henry Illingworth took photographs all over this area, including this shot, these 2 shots taken right on this spot. So those rock formations behind me there are these right here. And then he also did a beautiful shot of the entire camp, 1,500 horses and mules, 100 wagons, 1,000 men, and this is also where gold was discovered. So it's possibly, the most historic site in the Black Hills, and we have these wonderful pictures showing the view back then, and then we can look out today and match those images with modern cameras today. So we find these sites mostly by looking for the background first. If you look for the background, you can sometimes see distant ridges, and then you can work your way to the foreground, such as these rock formations that we see in one of the photos taken by Illingworth in 1874. It's kind of a process of like a treasure hunt. You're looking for that background first and you work your way to the foreground.
Paul Horsted's work on these projects includes acquiring Illingworth prints made from the original negatives.
He died in 1893, committed suicide, by the way, up in St. Paul, Minnesota, where he was located, and his negatives eventually found their way to the State Historical Society here in South Dakota. So they're in the state archives in Pierre, most of the negatives. Now, not all of them were transferred around 1921, I think it was, to the state. During that time, I think they used to just loan these out to people. So I've found prints in Rapid City that were made in the 1920s that I'm almost positive the negatives came out to Rapid City, were borrowed and printed by Rise Studio, and they stamped them on the back, Rise Studio. But these are original prints right from the original negatives that are quite valuable to see now, because in some cases those prints show the condition and existence of certain negatives that don't exist anymore.
Comparing Illingworth's extras to the pictures he published reveals a lot about what exactly was happening at a brief moment in the distant past. A well-known picture of George Armstrong Custer after a hunt can be compared to a lesser-known picture taken a few minutes before. Captain Ludlow, on the right, was the expedition's engineer. In the published picture, he's sitting. In the extra, he's standing.
Again, these were taken probably within just a couple minutes of each other, and by clicking back and forth, you've almost got like a very short movie showing what was going on. And the wagons are moving at a speed that during the exposure of probably 5 or 10 seconds, they're blurring a little bit. And you can see that over here as well. So this is obviously the shot that Illingworth thought was a better photo. Everybody is a little sharper in the picture than they are in this picture. And but again, that idea of watching how wagons are coming into the background. I'm speculating here, but I'm imagining Illingworth shooting this picture and then walking over and sort of saying, okay, I want you to sit, I need to pose this a little differently.
Horsted's yesterday and today comparisons are interesting, and they've also been useful. He's worked with the U.S. Forest Service in the Black Hills on a project to identify historical fire events. Stumps in Horsted's pictures are compared with the same stumps in the 1874 Illingworth photos. The Forest Service estimates the stump's age using tree ring data, and they can figure out when the tree sprouted and when it was burned in a forest fire.
This tree was born in the 1300s. That's when it was germinated and grew, and it burned in 1550, and then 224 years later, Illingworth photographed it, and then 140 some years after that, I photographed it. So it's been there since, this tree stump has been in that position since 1550.
Like most collectors, Paul Horsted is selective about what he acquires, and he's interested in more than one historical photographer and more than one subject.
For example, Sylvan Lake I'm really interested in. This lodge was built, I think, about 1893. The man who built it, Reeder, also built a dam which flooded this little valley and caused this beautiful lake that we still treasure today in Custer State Park. Scotty Phillips Ranch, north of Pierce somewhere. Scotty Phillips in a sleigh, being pulled by two bison. This is the 1904 statehood battle. Don't move the capital 200 miles from a garden spot like ours. This is in downtown Pierre.
This photograph of Deadwood taken in June of 1876 is thought to be the first picture ever taken of the old gold camp. But a few years ago, Horsted was looking at a photo auction site and noticed a picture that was similar, but not the same. In one photo, the logs of a cabin being built are on the ground. In the next, the logs are in place. In one photo, a tree stands in the middle distance. In the next, it's gone.
This looks like a morning shot, and this looks like an afternoon shot. The light's coming from the west, it's coming from the east here. So I think this might be the morning of this picture being taken, making it just a few hours earlier than the previously known earliest shot. Probably by the same photographer, although that's unknown.
Paul Horsted continues to re-photograph historical views, and he's expanded his range. He's most recently published a book comparing old and new views of national parks. He says there's nothing like the experience of connecting with other photographers from long ago.
It's just an astonishing feeling. You feel like you're standing in history, I've called it before, exactly where that photographer was 140 years ago. And you kind of feel like you should look around and see his hat or something laying there. There's a feeling of actually being right there at that time.
Penny postcards were the social media of the late 1880s to the beginning of World War I. Travelers would send them to family and friends, announcing their arrival at a destination, as holiday greetings or just to say hello. Mike Weiss of Aberdeen, South Dakota, has collected over 5,000 of these Instagrams of the past.
I'm just kind of a bit of a collector and a bit of a history buff, and enjoy the history, and actually found a couple postcards on eBay one time about 25 years ago. And it just so happens to turn out that one of the first ones that I purchased on eBay was from somebody here in Aberdeen who had an interest in postcards as well. And so we struck up a relationship and began to talk about them. I was more interested in the vivid images of the postcards, the photographs. He happened to be a bit of a different kind of a take on the history, and he collected them for the historical significance of the cancellation of the communities and the different evolution of the state as it went from a territory to a state, and all of the different towns that have disappeared now having a collection and being able to chronicle and identify those snapshots in time. So it was something that just kind of evolved, developed, and began collecting, and found ways to expand my collection. So did that and enjoy sharing it.
The second industrial revolution in the United States was a boom in technology in many industries, including photography.
The images are unique because they were from the 1880s through the early 19-teens, and the quality is pretty amazing. Even though they're condensed down into 3.5 by 5 inch postcards, they're not pixelated. They would use large format cameras that actually took long exposures. That's why in some of them you'll see that they're a little bit posed, and if you've got young kids or somebody, they'll look blurred because they actually moved, and it was a period of several seconds that you'd get the exposure, and that's part of the reason why you have so much detail in them. It was basically the easiest format to be able to actually produce it, either mass produce it or produce it. There's a lot of photographs. You've seen the panoramic photographs, you know, where it's a long, wide one that's almost, you know, like 180 to 360 degrees. But they were difficult to produce and then to be able to market and so forth. The postcard, you know, that format and the technology basically to produce that was pretty ubiquitous, you know, within the industry. And so a lot of times, you know, some of them were made into photographs, but a lot of images wound up on postcards simply because that was the easiest medium to be able to actually produce that, to be able to share it with people.
Many penny postcards sold in the late 1800s and early 1900s were not mass-produced images, but instead single photographs taken by local photographers.
My collection is kind of illustrative of the fact that, you know, there's really small, obscure little communities that there's an awful lot of images of, and it's basically reflective of the fact that you had a photographer that was in that community for a period of time doing business. And so you would have kind of two contrasts. There would be mass-produced penny postcards that would have an image or a modified image, and they were commercially available, and they were basically a penny a piece, and they would manufacture them and distribute them, you know, in bulk. And then there were others that were a single unique image where you'd have photographers that would take images for a specific purpose for a specific individual, and it's a one-off just like a regular photograph would be. And the penny postcard was an easy way. It's kind of the earlier precursor version to a text message these days. A lot of the messages on the back are basically simply, you know, notifying somebody, I made it. I made it to Mobridge, I made it to Aberdeen, I made it to, you know, whichever community is.
Mike Weiss has found that the number of postcards that were produced in different towns and cities is directly based on whether or not a photographer had chosen to set up a business in that community.
One of them that always sticks out to me, for instance, is a small community of Dallas, South Dakota. Got a pretty significant little batch of postcards from Dallas, which never really had a huge population, but there was a short period of time in the land rush days where, just like you used to see in the old westerns and so forth, people came to town and they lined up and they shot the gun and they took off and made their claim. And there's some postcard photographic documentation of some of that in a little town of Dallas, because there was a photographer there who took those pictures and made the postcards, and they're available.
Postcards were often just snapshots of the community printed from a photograph and placed in a local store as a means of income for the photographer and the business owner. However, because the photographer often took photographs of natural disasters such as twisters and fires, these events were also saved for history on penny postcards, along with community events like presidential visits.
Another interesting contrast is if you've got an event like a fire. There was a pretty spectacular fire on Main Street in Mitchell back in the teens, when you've got two different photographers with a little bit different kind of an eye and style and so forth, taking images of the same event. There's an interesting one, for instance, of, you know, there used to be traveling circuses and road shows and so forth of actually downtown, just off of Main Street, of somebody about 4 stories up off of, you know, one of those scaffolds who was literally going to jump off of that thing into a barrel of water.
Postcards were also used for promoting events and for advertising.
You've probably seen postcards where they show an ear of corn that's as big as a railroad car, you know, showing produce. You know, you can't grow things as big as you can out in the Midwest. You need to come here because it's the most prosperous place on the planet. Well, maybe not quite that much, but they painted a picture with that, and that was whole part of the marketing program to get people to move here.
The history of South Dakota communities is often word of mouth, passed down from generation to generation. Mike's postcard collection has allowed him to connect people with their family histories.
I've gotten feedback from people that have seen the 2 books that I did with Tom Hayes a number of years ago, that have actually had one, this is a number of years ago, from a gentleman in Oregon that just out of the blue said, you know, I'm not quite sure, but one of the images that you have of a bird's eye view and stuff, is there any chance I can get a larger view of that? So I sent it to him, and he sent me a letter back and said, a tall drink of water. The gentleman who's on the handcar from the photograph said, I can tell from this image that's a photograph of my grandfather, and I was actually there that summer visiting. He said, I've never seen that picture before. He said, I can't tell you how appreciative I am to be able to see that image, because I had it in my mind's eye but never was able to actually see it. So those are the kind of things that, you know, kind of give me goosebumps, and I love sharing with people.
Penny postcards being one of the first forms of social media, it is only fitting that the current age of social media that we all live in has allowed Mike to share his love of history and penny postcards.
I've actually got a friend who manages several Facebook pages, and one of them he manages is South Dakota History Images. And so there's quite an exchange of unique images, and it's fun to see what other people have that I don't, or people will have an image that they're not sure of and stuff, and so I'll get tagged in it every once in a while and stuff. It's like, Mike, what do you know, or what do you have, you know, that can help fill in the gaps a little bit with something like this. So I just consider myself fortunate to have had the opportunity with my, you know, little bit of compulsion to be able to get the collection together that I have, and to be able to share it when I can.
Bob Colby has done many things in his life. He's run a Sioux Falls antique and clock shop since 1972. He's been a teacher, an elected official with 5 terms on the Minnehaha County Commission. He's an historian and author, and he collects old photos. But not just any old photos.
And I thought, you have to make a limitation. You have to be specific, because if you collect photography, I mean, the world is really big. Really big. So I said, why not just South Dakota, Dakota Territory, North Dakota, Dakota people.
But not just any people.
I look at the images and try to say, is this worthy? Is it something that's kind of neat and interesting and should be preserved? So all of my photos have been selected. They're not just a shoebox full of images that were under Grandma's bed and somebody said, here, and you bought them. I may have bought the shoebox, but then I took out a half dozen or a dozen photos and then passed the rest on to someone else.
Colby goes to a lot of flea markets and photo swaps. He says the key to knowing whether or not a photo has value, historical or otherwise, is knowing more about history than the next person.
Because their eyes are seeing it as an image. Yeah, it's kind of interesting to them. But if you know the local history or the regional history, you say, that image records something that hasn't shown up before.
Take, for example, a photo called The Drinking Party. The picture is by William Illingworth, the official photographer of Custer's expedition to the Black Hills in 1874.
When Custer and crowd went to climb Harney Peak, now Black Elk Peak, they put up a covering and they put out a table and they were drinking beer and had a good party that day. That did not get published, probably because Custer was both a teetotaler and you might say he was a little bit arrogant at times. Well, the publication of this likely took place after he died at the Little Bighorn. But in the group, one of the people in that circle was a man by the name of Colonel Grant. Ulysses S. Grant's son. He was a full colonel. Custer ran the operation. He was along just for, some would say S&G. He was just kind of to keep tabs on Custer. But he did outrank him, which is kind of interesting that took place, because he and Custer and Grant did not always get along. They were a little antagonistic. But with the son along, you have evidence that Grant had a presence in the Black Hills during the Custer tour through.
Colby has collected a lot of images of South Dakotans involved in the Spanish-American War.
Everybody got a gun.
He also has a lot of pictures of Native Americans.
The images of a Native Americans across the United States were a commodity. People would buy pictures of Native Americans because they were enamored with them. The photographer might give them a photo. Okay, he'd give them one, but he had the negative. And once you have the negative, you can make 100 images.
Old pictures can be interesting, and they can also be useful. Bob Colby has a number of pictures taken during the construction and eventual failure of a spillway at the end of a diversion canal on the north side of Sioux Falls. A number of photographers snapped pictures of the flood from a number of angles. The Sioux River still floods, so the pictures serve as a reminder that
The same thing could happen again.
Colby's entire collection is large. Only a tiny fraction will fit on his dining room table. It's also a valuable collection, well over 7 figures, Colby says. As a collector, that's where Bob Colby is a little different. This is more than a hobby. But perhaps old pictures are most valuable because they can create connections between the people who look at them.
A marginal photograph is better than a Hemingway description. Because if I am a writer and I write about, let's say, the diversion canal, you will imagine what it looked like from your experiences without ever seeing it. But if I have a photo and we both look at it, we both see the same thing and we both can make a judgment on what was happening there because we have a common point of reference.
Today's social media sites have become repositories for a vast number of historical images. One of the most popular pages for South Dakota history is called South Dakota History of Cities, Towns, Places, and People Who Made It Great. It was started by David Franzen, a veteran, a lawyer, and now, by popular consensus at least, an historian. His interest in the past started when he was in his teens.
Looking at my grandmother and not knowing who she is and as far as how did she get here, what's her background and that's kind of where it all started.
Franzen saved and studied family photographs and asked a lot of questions of his relatives, but he wasn't deeply into history until an uncle passed away, leaving behind some items of historical interest, including thousands of photographs.
And when he died, the rest of the family delivered all of that stuff to me.
He began scanning the prints and storing the digitized images on computer hard drives. He focused first on the family pictures and worked at getting the stories behind the pictures from elder relatives. But the deeper he got into the collection, the more he began to realize what he had.
Photographs that I quickly decided had more of a statewide history interest rather than just a family history interest. And I wasn't sure, I hated to just put them back in the box and put them on a shelf. I knew that they would be of interest to somebody. And so what I did was I set up a Facebook page, a Facebook group, without any particular goals in mind other than just to keep those particular photographs for now until I decided what we needed to do with them.
The group grew quickly.
In the last 15 months, it's grown from 400 to 19,000. And so there is a big interest in South Dakota history.
Franzen's Facebook posts are no longer limited to just the pictures in his own collection. He reposts pictures from a variety of sources, as do other group members. People routinely post images about which they know very little, hoping other group members will recognize a person or place and restore the lost history.
It doesn't take much work. It manages itself just because it's made up of people who have such an intense history interest in local history.
Some of Franzen's posts tell stories that span decades. This picture shows a homesteader relative building a round barn in Potter County in the 1920s.
And he started building that barn one summer, and they finished it in one summer. But they set up this barn, and they used it for everything. They had a hog operation that ran out of this barn. They had a beef cattle operation that ran out of this big round barn. Everything to try to make a dollar to stay in business and stay alive. And it's still sitting there.
Several of David Franzen's family stories show how personal local history can be. His maternal grandmother was born to homesteaders living in Forest City. The Cheyenne River Agency was located directly across the river. People went back and forth across the river by boat and later by ferry.
My great-grandmother, one of the things that she did, she was a midwife and delivered a lot of babies on both sides of the river, in the Forest City area and also in the Native American community on the Cheyenne River Reservation.
David Franzen has a lot of photos from his hometown of Gettysburg. Like most rural South Dakota towns, Gettysburg has changed.
Just to go through 40 or 50 or 60 or 80 years of photographs and see how this community was built and what they were busy doing in 1910 versus what they were busy doing in 1980. It's interesting to look at the main street that they had to deal with, that you know that they were there on those sidewalks every Saturday afternoon, whether it was in DeSmet, South Dakota, or Gettysburg, South Dakota. And there's a blacksmith shop there that served everybody, including my ancestors and everybody else who lived there.
People in Franzen's Facebook page share similar interests but don't always share similar views, especially regarding the massacre at Wounded Knee. Franzen and a co-moderator will intervene in any online conversation that strays too far from civility, but they welcome an exchange of perspectives.
What we wanted to make sure happened is that, using Wounded Knee as an example, that people know about it and our young people know about it.
Franzen's Facebook group is one of several devoted to state history. A lot of people communicate and share in multiple groups. David Franzen admits that the online community can be entertaining, but he has a higher purpose in mind.
There's things about our past that we need to know, and it's not always pleasant. We have to know how we got here in order to know where we as a society and even our individual families are going from here. We have to know where we've been. We have to know the road that we traveled to get here.